Alright, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is the Wrestling Otaku back here on the Wrestling Otaku channel. And I'm back here for another video. It is, of course, Thursday, July 24th, 2025. This would be technically my second video of the day because I wanted to do a kind of follow-up to what I've been posting, the short I made earlier, the post I made earlier. And so yeah, let's get into this, man. We all know why we're here. I certainly did not think when I woke up today that I would be making a video like this. I mean, really, when you think about things like this, when you think about people passing, especially, in this realm of ours of, pro wrestling, when you think about a pro wrestler or somebody, famous, be it in the music industry or entertainment industry, whatever, you can never prepare. You never want to prepare for something like that. You can never truly prepare for something like that. So let's talk about it, man. I want to give my full thoughts on this because you guys should have seen the short video I uploaded by now. So wanted to talk about, of course, the news that we heard earlier today of the passing of one Terry Bollea, better known, of course, throughout the world as Hulk Hogan. News came out, he passed away this morning at the age of 71. Apparently he suffered a cardiac arrest due to complications with, I believe, surgeries he's had. Apparently he's been in poor health for quite some time. And I guess all his health issues just kind of, I guess it just kind of caught up to him. And, and he's no longer with us. So it is what it is, And a funny story about earlier today. Earlier today, I woke up around a little after 9 a.m. I was up at about 10 a.m. Went out because, of course, it's today's payday, so I wanted to get up early, get my pay, get my check, and then do what I got to do. And I did have a shift today, but it was fairly short. Only from like 1 to around 5:30 or so. But I did all that, and so I was out earlier. I was at the mall. This was around 11, a little after 11 a.m. I was at the mall, got some McDonald's, just want to eat, kind of, get a little bit of lunch, something to eat before I go to work. And I was listening, while I was out, and this is something I do regularly. I was, on my phone, and I had, of course, the earbuds in, and I was listening to some wrestling news videos, because, again, that's something I do while I'm out, while I'm eating. And I happened to listen to a video, I believe it was from WrestleLamia, that it was talking about how one of the stories that they covered was about Hulk Hogan and his ailing health. And basically saying that, he's apparently had health issues. He apparently had issues speaking or something to that effect, where, it was reported via, of course, his close friend, Bubba the Love Sponge, who has a podcast, that his health was not in the best of, he was not in the best of shape. He was having problems speaking, and he was bedridden or something like that. And yeah, that was literally this morning. And I was thinking to myself as I was listening to this, as I was listening to this video, as I was having my, lunch, I was thinking, man, how is that going to bode for, this great American, promotion that he and Bischoff are supposedly planning? Now, granted, it's not looking too good. I mean, the ticket sales for that thing are, it's just, you want to talk about, not making, you want to talk about not making a splash on Impact. I mean, that Real American freestyle promotion is all but dead in the water, especially now. But I was thinking to myself, like, how is this going to affect that? And this news of him not speaking, I was kind of thinking to myself, maybe that's, at the time, I was thinking maybe that's like divine intervention, for all the bullshit he's told over the years, And that's what I was thinking. And then, sure enough, not even an hour later, I catch wind of all this news. I just, like, immediately as soon as I saw it, I was like, wow, are you serious? And then I went and I confirmed it. It was on TMZ. It was on Fox News. It was on freaking CBS News, NBC, ABC. Every major news outlet is covering this. So this is a legit thing. It was a legit thing. And as soon as I saw that first report, it spread like wildfire. And I was like, wow, dude, this is legit. Hulk Hogan has indeed passed away. I couldn't believe it, dude. Like, it completely caught me off guard. It completely caught me by surprise. As most of the time when you hear about a celebrity passing, I mean, yeah, the other day we had Ozzy Osbourne. Again, I've mentioned that in another video I did. I mentioned in a post. Ozzy Osbourne passed away just the other day. Hall of Famer. Legend. The father, you could say, of heavy metal, the Prince of Darkness, and we lose Ozzy Osbourne. We had the Cosby Show actor Malcolm Jamal Warner passed away a few days before that, and now we have here today we have Hulk Hogan, the passing of Hulk Hogan. And I just want to share kind of what I'm feeling right now, because I'm not gonna lie, I do have conflicted feelings about this. I've had conflicted feelings throughout the day. And seeing all the stuff that has come out on social media, both positive and negative, because there is some negative, and just the kind of whirlwind of reactions that I'm seeing, it's just like I am conflicted, in terms of my feelings about this. On one hand, you got to look at Hulk Hogan and his significance in regards to his place in pro wrestling. I mean, the man was as influential to pro wrestling as anybody, and that is not, a debate. That's not a discussion. I mean, that's legit. I think if it wasn't for as big as Hulk Hogan was in the 80s, especially in the mid to late 80s, as big as he wasn't just a pro wrestling. He wasn't just big in pro wrestling. He was a cultural icon. He was an 80s icon. When you think about the 80s, when you think about just the 80s as a whole, and you think about people who were famous back then, people who were well known back then, who you heard the name, you just hear a name and you know instantly who it is. Hulk Hogan was among those names. He was an 80s icon. He was a figure, one of the biggest figureheads of the 80s you could think of. You think Michael Jackson, you think Prince, you could throw, again, Ozzy Osbourne in that list, you could throw a number of people. And Hulk Hogan is up there. He's on that list. He's on that list. He was that big. He was one of the few people in the history of pro wrestling that transcended the business of pro wrestling. He was in it. Outside of all the stuff he did with WWF, he was in movies. Most famously, he was in Rocky, one of the Rocky movies, Rocky 3, I believe. And he made a number of appearances, in terms of TV and media. And it's just like the dude was an icon, He was an icon of entertainment, And in terms of wrestling, like, I don't want to necessarily say he made wrestling or he was the sole reason why wrestling was on the map, but I don't think the golden age of wrestling would have been as big as it was without Hulk Hogan. I don't think Vince McMahon would have gotten WWF to be as big as it was during that period from the beginning of the 80s to the going into the 90s and all that. I don't think he would have gotten WWF to the heights that it reached if it wasn't for the effect of Hulk Hogan. If it wasn't for Hulk Hogan and his popularity, I don't think Vince would have succeeded. Now, there were still names in WWF. He still had names in pro wrestling. There were still, the Randy Savages of the world. There were still the Andre the Giants of the world. The Ric Flairs, the Dusty Rhodes. Later you had guys like Warrior, guys like Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, Owen Hart, The Undertaker. Those are more so 90s guys. Or, well, some of them were started in the 80s, but they really made their name in the 90s. But, there were guys there, the Bruno Sammartinos of the world, the Ricky Dragon Steamboats of the world. There were guys there, but Hulk Hogan was the one who really kind of spearheaded that whole thing. Really kind of, Hulkamania, the whole essence of Hulkamania. I really think that is what took WWF and pro wrestling to that next level and made them as mainstream as they were ever going to be. In the 80s. And I don't think WWF accomplishes that without Hulk Hogan and how influential he was to pro wrestling and to just pop culture in general, in the 80s. Like, he was that big. He was that big, and you cannot deny his influence on pro wrestling. And then you look at what happened in the 90s, And ultimately he got ousted from WWF because of the whole steroid thing. Vince McMahon and WWF had to clean house basically. A lot of their well-known names were basically getting ousted from WWF. They had a house cleaning of sorts. Hulk Hogan left. He went to WCW, and he floated around for a bit. And then in '96, he revolutionized the business again when he, Scott Hall, and Kevin Nash formed the NWO. Hulk Hogan turned heel for the first time in his career, and he formed the NWO and revolutionized the business again and took WCW to new heights. And again, it's just one of those things. Like, the dude is so influential to the history of pro wrestling, at least in the last 30 or 40 years. Like, you cannot deny the impact that Hulk Hogan had on pro wrestling. It's just like, he's one of those dudes. He's one of those dudes whose name is synonymous with WWF and with pro wrestling, So it's just one of those kind of things. And for him, for a name like that to pass on, this is, like I said in my first video, this is a significant loss. Like, I don't think people realize the gravity of Hulk Hogan, somebody, the name and the level of a Hulk Hogan passing away. Like, it's such a big deal, and he's one of those guys who he could not, like, at least back then anyway, this was not somebody you could replace, or this is not somebody who you can have somebody else come in and fill his shoes. I don't think that would have been possible. Like I said, they had names. They had Savage, they had Steamboat, they had Ric Flair, they had Dusty Rhodes, they had all these names. It wasn't just Hogan. They had a lot of names. They had a number of names, a lot of legends, a lot of Hall of Famers, guys who helped, pave the way in terms of, pro wrestling in the industry. But without a Hulk Hogan, I don't think they would have gotten as big as they did. WWF. I don't think they would have gotten. I don't think Vince McMahon would have taken that thing as big as they ended up being without Hulk Hogan's influence. So yeah, you got to recognize that. You got to recognize that. And so, that's obviously the big thing about it. Well, losing somebody like a Hulk Hogan and all that, and that's the more positive aspect of it. And then on the flip side, you kind of look at the negative, and more so, I'm referring to his time, more so after wrestling, like when he even during wrestling, like the stories we've heard about conflicts that he's had, just things that have been reported on, wrestlers, people who worked in the business who have worked with Hogan, things that people have said about him, that he's a selfish individual, he's a toxic individual to be around, or things of that nature. He's a self-serving individual. He refuses to put people over. The whole, that's not going to work for me, brother. That whole stuff. And we've heard countless, a number of different accounts from individuals who have had issues throughout the years of Hogan, like a Randy Savage, like guys like Jesse Ventura, guys like Scott Steiner, other guys in WCW who worked with him, and even again, you can name a Booker T, you can name Undertaker, just a number of people who have taken issue with Hogan and how he is behind the scenes, in terms of, like, again, working with him as a individual, working with him as a colleague, or as a fellow talent, as a fellow wrestler, and so on and so forth. And just all the various lies that he's told, the various stories that he's spun to make himself look better than he actually is, and all the stuff that has come out about him in the last 20 or so years. Again, the stories we've heard, the reports we've heard, just all the things that kind of paint him in this light, that maybe he isn't this grandiose real American, maybe he isn't the hero that people paint him out to be. He all these things we've heard, all the things that we hear about him, all the things that have come out about him, really make him look like not a very good individual to be around. For lack of a better term. And then, of course, there's the big thing that came out around 2015, of course, obviously you got to address this. There was the allegations of him being racist. Okay, the sex tape, the audio that came out in 2015. I saw something on social media. After that, I got to bring this up because I saw this earlier. That whole thing with the audio of Hogan, talking about his daughter's boyfriend, who was black, and that whole thing of him basically kind of more or less admitting to the fact that he was a racist, basically saying, if she's gonna have sex with this N word, of course the N word with the ER, he said the N word with the hard ER multiple times. Basically, saying, if this N word is gonna, be with my daughter, it should at least be an 8-foot, N word who's worth like $100 million or something like that, like a basketball player, blah blah blah. And then he would go on to say, we're all a little racist. I'm racist to a fault. Of course, we all know about that. I've spoken on that several times, and of course that whole thing came out, and the massive backlash that came out after that. He was ultimately fired from WWE at the time, and he was more or less blacklisted from WWF, blacklisted for pro wrestling for a good while until they slowly tried to incorporate him back, within the last 5 or so years. But yeah, that whole thing, the racist stuff, and as I was saying before, like that audio, the sex tape audio where he basically was, he went on that, N-word filled tirade, basically, where he basically outed himself as being a racist. That actually came out. The audio of that actually released 10 years ago to the day. Like literally, it came out exactly 10 years ago on this day, July 24th, 2015, was when that audio was released and exposed. And now here we are 10 years later on July 24th, 2025, and Hulk Hogan has passed away. Some would call that karma. Some would call that, that's just eerie right there. Like literally 10 years ago to the day from the time that damning audio came out when Hogan basically outed himself as racist, and now he passes on. I'm sorry, that's just too crazy to be a coincidence, man. It's crazy. But yeah, so that whole thing, the racist stuff and, all the backlash regarding that, he has really not recovered his public image, and his public image has not changed since. He apologized afterwards, but I really don't think a lot of people accepted his apology. I think some people think that it was like a half-hearted apology, or he didn't really mean it. So it's one of those kind of things, and people are going to say, well, people make mistakes and yada yada, and that's all well and good, but when you say things like he said in that video, it's really hard to overlook that. It's really hard to forgive something like that, and things like that, the racist stuff, saying I'm racist to a fault, all that combined with all the other things that we heard about how he is, what it's like to work with him, and him being just generally just a selfish individual, not very what's the word I'm looking for? Him being just a selfish individual, not willing to put people over, constantly putting himself over, constantly valuing himself over other people and such, and just all the stories we've heard about, from various other wrestlers and people in the business in regards to how he is, behind the scenes, with them dealing with him personally. And just the various lies, again, the lies that he's told, and he's a habitual liar. People have called him a habitual liar, and this, that, and the third, and all these things combined that have come out about him in the last 20 years, it is going to really forever leave a black mark on his legacy. And it's just like, no matter what anybody says, it's just all that stuff. It's not going to go away, It's forever going to tarnish his legacy. It's forever going to be a black mark on his legacy, on his name, and it's going to continue to follow his name, even beyond the grave. When people remember Hulk Hogan, that's what's going to come up, and things like that aren't so easily forgotten about or forgiven, So that's the bad side on it. That's the downside on it. And like I said before, throughout the day, I've seen a lot of kind of conflicting responses in regards to this news. There's a good chunk of people who are sorrowful, who are sad, of his passing. People, you know, recalling their time, their childhood. A lot of people saying they grew up watching Hogan. He was their inspiration. He was their hero. He was the reason that certain people got into pro wrestling, so on and so forth. People who grew up in the '80s and this, that, and the third, and even later on who discovered Hogan later in life or later on in his career. And people who are sad that that he passed and so on and so forth. And there was a video I saw a little while ago of Ric Flair, talking about reacting to the news of Hogan's passing. The man was damn near in tears, and he was talking about how close of friends he and Hogan were, and how they were go up and down the roads, and so on and so forth. And he was one of the few guys who I heard who had really mostly positive things to say about Hogan, in the light of his passing. And and it's like you see a lot of people again paying respects, paying homage, recognizing the influence that he had on wrestling. And then on the other side, you see a lot of people who are kind of on the train of, well, oh, good riddance, people seemingly celebrating. I mean, I just call it like I see it, seemingly celebrating his passing and kind of spitting on his grave, basically. You see a lot of memes and stuff, about his passing, and saying, that's so sad anyway, or just a bunch of memes, just kind of poking fun at it, poking fun at his passing and stuff like that. It's just like it's kind of like you see stuff like that, and it's like, I get it, I understand. Obviously, this is not, he was not an individual, like, especially with all the stuff that I mentioned, all the things that he was known for, all the things that came out about him in the last 20 years. He was not the most liked individual in the world. He was far from the hero that he was portrayed as on TV and in the ring, in the squared circle. And I certainly understand why people feel that way now that Hulk Hogan has passed. So, I understand it, from that perspective, especially, again, the racist stuff. A lot of advocates for, people who are against racism, I understand why they feel that way. Excuse me, people more or less celebrating his passing and things of that nature, and saying good riddance and things like that. Again, I understand where they're coming from and all that. I'm not gonna be one of those people. Like I said, I have my reservations. Again, all the racist stuff. Like, again, these are things that you can't really forgive right at the snap of a finger. Like, it's not gonna. Like I said, it's not gonna go away. You can't really forgive something like that, or forget something like that just at the whim, even if the individual's no longer with us. So it's one of those things. But at the same time, I recognize the contributions that he made to the business. So I choose to look at it like that. And I ask, people watching this video, I ask that in this time of mourning, we've now that, again, Hogan has passed. This is the day of his passing. He's no longer with us. That you, at the very least, pay respect, if not to Hogan himself, if not to the man himself, you can at least pay respect to his family, to his loved ones, to the ones who lost somebody, to his children, Nick and Brooke Hogan. Even though, certain members of his family he was not exactly on good terms with, but still, this was, again, in his kid's case, this was their dad. This was their father, This was their role model. This was their life, basically, for a long time. To his son and daughter, Nick and Brooke Hogan, to his to his ex-wife, Linda, even though, again, they're far from on good terms, from the things I've heard recently. But, I don't know how she feels about that. I don't know if she's had reacted to it. To his current wife or whoever it was he was with. I don't know if she's a wife or I don't know what. But anyway, so like, you know, to his family, his immediate family, you know, his children, you know, his immediate family members, relatives, to his friends, you know, the people he was closest to, his close friends, you know, in the business, like again a Ric Flair, like, you know, Bubba Love Sponge and others, you know, if you don't want to pay respects to the man Hogan himself, you know, for whatever reason, at the very least, pay respect to the people who lost somebody, you know, to his family, to his loved ones, you know. I think I think we can at least do that, you know. But yeah, man. Outside of that, that's really all I have to say on it. It's like, you know, Hulk Hogan. You know, Hulk Hogan is gone, passed away, 71. It's shocking. You know, it's truly shocking. I know it happens. It's life. You know, life moves on. But I think the wrestling world for a good while will be definitely be feeling this one. You know, I'm sure a lot of people. Again, there's been an outpouring of people who have come out and, you know, given their reactions and, you know, get paid their respects in a ways, certain ones. And yeah, this is a big one, man. This is a big one. This is a big loss in the realm of pro wrestling entertainment. You know, in the realm of, you know, pop culture, you could say. Like I said, in 80s pop culture. So yeah, so I guess I'll cap this off by saying, rest in peace. You know, I hope your soul finds rest wherever he may end up. I hope his family. I wish the best for his family, for his immediate family, his, you know, close friends, and what have you. You know, my condolences go out to his family, to his son, his daughter, to his wife or whoever it is he's with, and you know, to again his close friends and everybody who are adversely affected by this. You know, my thoughts and prayers go out to them. You know, and so yeah, man. So we lost a big one today. You know, Hulk Hogan. No matter what you may think about him, and again, I'm not asking people to like him all of a sudden, or, you know, think that he's this great, upstanding individual, because he was far from that. From, again, the things we heard, and even I've had thoughts like that about him. You know, for all the stuff, all the things again that I mentioned before. But regardless of what you think of him, this is a pretty big passing, and yeah, it's going to be, this is definitely an individual who will not be forgotten, and I seriously doubt will ever be replaced in history. So that's pretty much all I got to say for that. So rest in peace to Hulk Hogan, and my thoughts, prayers, and condolences go out to his family and his loved ones. So that's pretty much all I got to say for that. So I thank you all for watching this video. Sorry if it ran kind of long, but I do, you know, I have a tendency to, you know, I did have quite a bit to say here. I had quite a bit of things to say here to get off my chest here. But thank you for watching again. Be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Appreciate all the support you get. And with that being said, that's pretty much going to do it for this video, man. Thank you for watching. Till next time, Wrestling Otaku. I'm out for now. See you guys later. Peace.